It's more the very loving and compassionate approach to ourselves that says, why do I do the things I do? And how can I give myself that love instead without compromising my actual goals?
I'm Kristin Dovbniak, holistic nutritionist and mama of two, and this is the Healthy Balance Mama podcast, where I believe every mama is a super mama, and you deserve to feel like one too, and you don't need to go on another diet to do it. This is a podcast about ditching the diet dogma, embracing intuitive eating, real food, and living healthy, happy, and whole. Hey friends, welcome back to the Healthy Balance Mama podcast. I'm Kristin Dovbniak, and today I have on not one, but two special guests I am so excited to share with you. Dr. Alex Golden, MD, and Megan Blacksmith, health coach and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner of Zesty Ginger, work with premenopausal women in an online group format. They focus on balancing hormones and supporting detoxification by teaching women to use the phases of their menstrual cycles to their advantage. They believe the natural ebb and flow that happens to our hormones, organ systems, and bodies overall as women is there to renew and strengthen us. When we work with the natural cycles of our bodies, we allow ourselves to heal and recover on a level that few of us ever reach when we operate within the rules of the hectic modern world. Even the alternative medicine world has lost its connection to how the female body operates. Most protocols and health programs out there show no regard for the cycles that govern the flow of our bodies as women. By focusing on different activities, elixirs, foods, and rituals each week of your cycle, we can help the body to detoxify naturally. They're the founders of the PMS Project and Healthy Hormones Group, as well as hosts of the 4-Phase Cycle podcast. To learn more, follow them on Instagram at zesty_ginger, where they share tips for optimizing your cycle and hormones, naturally supporting detoxification, and upgrading your food, products, and mindset. Wow, what a resume! So as many of you listeners know, I am a bit of a hormone health nerd. I dug into hormone health headfirst when I was diagnosed with PCOS 3 years ago because, to be honest, I didn't learn a whole lot in either of the nutrition schools I went to. So I am so excited to share Dr. Alex and Megan's gentle and balanced approach to hormone balance. So welcome, Dr. Alex and Megan.
Thanks so much for having us. Yeah.
So I already shared your bio, but I would love if you could just share your story about how you got interested in helping women with hormone health.
Sure, I can jump in. So this is Megan here speaking. I like to say that I fell off the hormone cliff after I had my first child, and that's what led to my love of holistic health and nutrition and all things functional medicine, because I fell into the category that many women experience where you feel really, really, really horrible and you go to your doctor and everything on your lab work says you're fine, and everyone just kind of shrugs their shoulders and says, oh, you're not overweight, you must be fine, just kind of sends you on the way. And after having experienced this when I had an almost 1-year-old and just completely dropping off, I was having extreme fatigue. I started having anxiety and panic attacks. Just really couldn't, like, getting up and going to my job every morning. I joked with my coworkers. I'm like, well, I could break my arm. Like, what could I do that's like not super painful, but I could get out of work for a while? I just really, really couldn't handle going. And that's when I said, okay, enough is enough. This obviously isn't normal. And I found a practitioner who runs functional lab work like the lab that we now use in our Healthy Hormones group. So looking at your Dutch with your hormone levels and looking at your neurotransmitters. And once I ran those functional labs, there was all sorts of things out of balance. It was really clear what was going on, which was a total relief for me at that time. And that's when I wanted to share this with other women, because it's so painful to go through years of thinking, you know, it's all in your head, nothing's wrong, when you feel horrible.
Yeah, and I have a very similar story to Megan's, except for mine is not around childbirth related, but yeah, I was a relatively normal kid, but always had really, really severe cramps and bad periods. And then it wasn't until I went to college and everything just sort of snowballed into badness. And I started having chronic pelvic pain that then generalized and became, a whole body pain syndrome through the years. And I went from being a piano performance major to being like, I'm not getting any answers. Everyone keeps telling me I'm completely fine. There's got to be more help than this that we can provide people. And I kind of switched gears, applied to med school, did that, and I'm on my way. I'm finished residency. I'm now an anesthesiologist by training, and I'm going to continue my training to become a pain doctor for women with chronic pain syndromes. But of course, a big part of that is, for my own struggle with endometriosis and severe hormonal imbalances and going through 3 failed IVF cycles, there's a lot that Megan and I really believe in the fact that we should have learned all this stuff about our bodies back in middle school, but somehow we're in our 30s learning about what our body does and actually how to optimize it and actually get a user's guide to this, Ferrari that we gave access to, and we're all sort of pretending like it's a van. And and so that has been, that journey of feeling really, really disempowered to then learning how that works has been Megan's and I motivation for teaching other women how to do this, because it shouldn't take, each of us have a 15-year history, so a combined 30-year history of this. And we really feel like it shouldn't be this hard to figure out what's going on. It shouldn't feel so, isolated and alone and like you're a freak inside your body, and that, really this isn't the experience that we are intended to have. And so we're really passionate about empowering women to know how to deal with things for themselves and not being at the mercy of, people telling you that everything's fine and you shouldn't feel the way you're feeling.
I love that so much. And I think so many women have been in, and I know you work with so many women who've been in such similar spaces where they're like, I have had these symptoms for years and years, and everyone just tells me that it's normal. And I think as a society of women, we've come to just believe that things like super severe PMS or irregular periods or having, this pain or fatigue is normal, just like you're saying. And I know that, part of my history is that I was diagnosed with PCOS 3 years ago, or I guess almost 4 years ago now. I was 26 and I had had symptoms since I was 11. And I was put on birth control as a teenager, and mostly actually because I lost it, because I was going through a phase of very severe restriction and overexercise, and I lost my period, but it had always been irregular. And the doctor was like, "Oh, this will fix it." Of course, right? If you go on birth control, then it fixes it, so to speak. But you know that it doesn't actually fix anything; it just creates that breakthrough bleed. But I was convinced I was fine, and it wasn't until I went off of it, almost 10 years later, that I was like, oh, it didn't fix anything at all. And that was where I started learning. And I'm like, it was something I was actually gonna, talk to you about later. But the fact that I didn't even know until I was 26 or 27 years old that there was more than one phase of the female cycle. So can you share why you focus on the different phases and what the phases of the female cycle are?
Yeah, definitely. Right. I mean, I have so much to say about that, because it's a little ridiculous that for women, we have one answer to a million different problems, right? So it's like birth control or bust. And then, that whole experience of what our society is telling us about it. So we all have a 24-hour clock, right? So we have circadian rhythms. And so a lot of our world is based on this male physiology where they have the 24-hour rhythm. And then that's why we all, for the most part, feel like we should be, equally productive every single day, and we should have control over that experience. But what we haven't really been valuing as a society too much is that there's also, for women, another cycle that's the month-long cycle, that there are fluctuations in our physiology that set us up for success in various areas, and it's all very supremely balanced and helps us live more in line with like our superpowers as women. And a lot of times we don't take this into account because we are still modeling off male physiology. And even, people who are out doing amazing things like Tony Robbins, who's a man, his schedule and his way of doing things doesn't work for a lot of women. And that's just something that we've noticed. And so one thing that when we started looking deeper into female physiology, we realized that all of us have this cycle that many of us are underappreciating. So the way that we break it down is that, the cycle isn't just your period, it's the entire month from, the start of one cycle to the beginning of the other. And so when you look at female physiology, a lot of times the women who work on women's health, or the practitioners that work on women's health, they notice that it sort of breaks itself up nicely into 4 categories. And a lot of us name these different things. We name ours by what is actually happening inside the body, but we're all looking at the same physiology. So the way that we break it up is that phase 1 starts when you get your period, and we call it the release phase, and that's when it's a very introspective time. It's when the right and left hemispheres of the brain communicate very well together, and that's when we have the experience of being able to sit down, formulate a plan for our lives, and then make really conscientious decisions about what is most important to us and how we're going to take action to get to where we want to go. So that one is a quieter phase. And a lot of times you'll notice people have created memes like, oh, I got my period, so of course I want to sit on the couch in my sweatpants and watch Netflix. And a certain part of that is absolutely true. Your physiology is asking you to quiet down, not only because having your period is physically taxing for the body, not taxing, but like it's a high intensity activity. And then, and when we get that call to slow down, that's really when we get to hone in on that super connection in our brain and come to realizations about our life. So that's phase 1. And that's really, just a quiet time for our hormones as well. Then phase 2 is very dynamic instead. So phase 2 is called the rise phase. It's when our estrogen starts rising to tell our pituitary to release a signal that allows our ovaries to ovulate. So phase 2 is from, about 7 days from your period to ovulation. And that's when we feel really empowered. That's when it's the best time to, start a new exercise regimen, start that new elimination diet or diet that you're hoping to stick to. It's when our brains are so focused on what do we want to do and what do we need to do to get there? And a lot of us feel so much energy at this time to make that happen. Then after ovulation, that's when phase 3 kicks off. And phase 3 we call the plateau phase. That's when our hormones get nice and balanced, hopefully. If we've ovulated and everything is going well, then our estrogen and progesterone sort of plateaus out, hence the name. And that's when we really feel the best at communicating with others. It's a great time to have important conversations with the people in your life. We're just really great at taking all the stuff that's going on and expressing it to others. It's a great time to, whatever that new goal that you took on, you planned in phase 1, you took action in phase 2, and phase 3, the question is, how do I keep putting one foot in front of the other? You're reacting to things going on in your life, you're making corrections, but you're keeping up. So it's another very outwardly focused, action-oriented phase. And then phase 4 is a return back to peace and calm. So phase 4 is, we call it the pause, and that's when our hormones are starting to slow down. We're getting ready to, either implant a baby or have our period again. And a lot of times, this is the time when women tend to have PMS symptoms. But a lot of times it's because we haven't been paying attention, and setting up the success of the other 3 phases, that at this time we begin to experience these things. And when we honor the rest of our cycle, instead, what phase 4 becomes is this really calm, retrospective time where we find a balance between, whatever new things that we're trying to go for, and how do we bring in real life? How do we find a balance of, with things like cravings? How do we say, yes, there's a place for chocolate and whatever in my life, but I don't need to inhale a bar of chocolate because I feel overwhelmed and stressed, right? So it's this beautiful time to find that more nuanced balance of that real life experience, instead of being like, I fell off the wagon, now I'm screwed. It's more the very, loving and compassionate approach to ourselves that says, why do I do the things I do? And how can I give myself that love instead without compromising my actual goals? And so then when that ties it up nicely and allows us to, doing all of this work allows us to optimize that next cycle and the next cycle and the one after that. And that's when Megan and I talk about hopping on the upward spiral. Every time we find ourselves optimizing one phase, then the next phase becomes that much more successful, and you kind of hop on the up and up. So that's the deal with the phases.
I feel like so many women are having aha moments right now about how their bodies and their brains change throughout the month, because I think that a lot of times we are expected to be the same way, to have our moods be the same, to have our feelings be the same, to have our bodies feel the same throughout the month. And I think that it's so freeing to hear that, oh my gosh, this is natural. This is the way my body was made. My body was made to have different cycles each week, or ish is a little bit different throughout the cycle. And I think a lot of what you ladies do is help women, like you said, sort of optimize each one of these phases and work with their bodies. So
right, because the body it's doing this whether you know it or not, or whether you're utilizing the gifts that you have or not. So a lot of times, for example, let's use phase 1 when our brain is really super connected within itself. So really the experience that a lot of women have is overwhelm at this time, because their brain is doing that work, but without any instruction from your higher self and your prefrontal cortex, it's going to pick things in your environment. I don't like how my hair looks. This dress is stupid. Why I need to clean up. Why is this all cluttered? Why is this messy? Didn't I tell him to clean this up before? Then our brain just goes into this thing where it's doing the work, but it has no direction on where you're taking it. Whereas when you take that time to really quiet and align within yourself, then that sort of work, when you ask the right questions, your brain comes up with really brilliant answers. So then instead of nitpicking at random things, that says, I have this problem, how can I work on it? And then you actually come up with a plan that's doable, reasonable, realistic, and actually impacts your life in a meaningful way. So it's really, it's happening anyways. It's just up to us to then direct it a little bit more so it's working for us rather than against us.
Takes so much stress away, I think, from, I don't know, I think the way sometimes that we feel the way that we feel isn't the way that we should feel. But like you're saying, when you can kind of work with it rather than against it. So the woman who is oh my gosh, I'm having all these aha moments. All of a sudden now I realize that there's more than just one phase of my cycle. I want to be able to start optimizing the different phases of my cycle and feeling really good throughout the month. Maybe, avoiding things like PMS, balancing hormones naturally. Where does this woman start?
Amazing question. So we like to have women go through 3 general steps. The first is education, the next is empowerment, and the third is enjoyment. So the very first step when you're getting started is what you just said. I was the same. I was 27 years old. I'm 37 now, but when I finally figured out all the things that happen in the female cycle, when I read Taking Charge of Your Fertility, and was just blown away that all these things were happening when I had been taught that, you just go about your day, you go about your month. It's no big deal, right? So the education piece of just even knowing that there's different things happening at different times, knowing that you're not crazy, knowing that these are things that all females go through, and you start to understand your own cycle. So we like data. We like having each person really track. So that's kind of the key in the first step, is tracking your own cycle. We like to have people use basal body temperature, use the basal body temperature and charting it to try to figure out when they ovulate, because it's really key to know when you're going into the middle, when you're in the very middle of your cycle. So that's going to go switch over from one focus to another focus in the way we look at the cycle. So tracking for a month and just starting with 1 month, but then usually after a few months, women can kind of get a hold of what's happening. They're looking for that, 0.4 to 0.8 shift in temperature, rise in temperature, which is then showing around ovulation is occurring. So you can then generally break your cycle up and you know what's happening. I know for me that this became really, really empowering, which is the next step. And therefore, then I could enjoy life a little bit more, because I started to realize these things that I felt made no sense. So for people who've had health struggles, which probably many of your listeners have, and Alex and I have ourselves, you're often tracking a lot of things, trying to figure out what the heck, like I was doing so well. Why all of a sudden am I down when I thought I was doing well? So you're tracking. And what becomes really complicated and confusing with tracking is when you're not keeping in mind where you are in your cycle, because you're thinking it's out of nowhere, or you're thinking you had 3 good months. You're just not quite understanding. And for me, this was just a really small example, is my relationship with caffeine and sugar. So I, in general, don't do all that well with caffeine. I've never in my life had a cup of coffee, which I know is crazy, but even just like black tea is a lot of caffeine for me. So somehow, majority of the month, I will do just fine with black tea. But there's this certain period of time where all of a sudden I'm anxious, just so anxious through the roof. It's so uncomfortable being in my own body. And to me, it seemed to just come out of absolutely nowhere, because I had no idea where I was in my cycle. I had no idea it could be related to that. I had no idea that there were different times of month where, right before your period starts or in the middle of ovulation, you have a lot of excess estrogen. Your body's detoxing that out. As it's detoxing that out, your liver's doing a lot of extra work. And then when you add something in like caffeine, sugar, alcohol, that kind of exacerbates what your body's already doing. In traditional Chinese medicine, anxiety is linked up with liver. So we're putting a huge burden on the liver. My anxiety levels went through the roof. And once I started to track and realize exactly when that was happening, I found there were probably just a 3 or 4 day period where those things didn't work well for me. And now I am empowered to make choices. And we really don't believe in deprivation mode ever for our ladies. So sometimes I still will choose to have that caffeine during that time, but I know what I'm getting into. and it's not this surprise out of nowhere. It's not this, oh my gosh, my health is falling apart. I don't know what this is. This is leading to something horrible. This is no, I made a choice. I knew what time of month it was. I know I will now probably deal with a couple hours of anxious thoughts. And honestly, the anxious thoughts aren't quite as intense because it doesn't involve the negative spiral of what does this mean? Where is this going? What is this coming from? My health is falling apart for forever. So we've found that just education, understanding where you are in your cycle can be really empowering, and then women can enjoy their life and make choices from that empowered space. And the same thing happens a lot of time with women. Alex mentioned, when you're starting a new diet or lifestyle or exercise or whatever it is, something you're trying to implement, something new, there are great times in the month to do that, and there are horrible times in the month to do that. And I found that out the hard way too, and was just blown away by how I had somehow no willpower, because a lot of times, right, we start a program on January 1st, or we started, on a very arbitrary group start date, and it might not go well. And when you look back, you go, oh yeah, that was right before my period. That was a horrible time to start that. So it helps you say, not think that you don't have the willpower or that you don't have the ability to do these things, but you just want to work within the optimal times of your cycle. So I think that was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, I love that though. It's so empowering, I think, for women to learn more about their bodies. And I am right with you in that education is so powerful. And I'm big on intuitive eating. I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor, so we talk all about that here on the podcast. But part of intuitive eating is learning about nutrition and pairing nutrition with what you're noticing is going on in your body. And if you have no idea that you have these different phases in your cycle, and like you said, you're like just feeling like you're crazy, you have no idea why this is happening, once you can finally make that connection. I know for me, I've started to make that connection for a bunch of different things. I've noticed I've struggled with digestive problems for years, and certain times of the month, if I am not on top of things like my probiotic foods and my general digestive health practices, my digestion gets a little bit wonky. And it's much more empowering to understand where that's coming from and be able to work with my body. And so I love that. So a lot of the listeners, the majority of them are women, and most of them are moms, and a lot of them are in those early stages of motherhood. So what if one of my listeners is interested in optimizing these phases of her cycle, but she still hasn't gotten her cycle back after having a baby? Does this still apply? How can she still work with this?
Yeah, definitely. There are two tracks that we generally have people follow. So anyone who has a regular cycle will follow their own time frame that their body sets. Anyone who does not have a regular cycle, whether that's because it's irregular or non-existent because they're breastfeeding or have hypothalamic pituitary amenorrhea or any of those things, then they follow the cycle of the moon, which we got lucky, or maybe we co-evolved, but the cycle of the moon is 28 and a half days ish, and the female cycle is around 28, so we definitely got very lucky in that way. And so instead of the phases how I described in the first time around, then for the second track and the group of people, it goes like this. So the new moon is phase 1, and then phase 2 kicks off at the first quarter moon, phase 3 is at the full moon, and then phase 4 is at the third quarter moon. So it's the exact same thing, except for that you follow the moon instead. And so as far as action items go, the very general broad goal that we're trying to go for is that during phases 1 and 2 of whatever track you're on, you're going to focus on optimizing inflammation. And then during phases 3 and 4 of whatever track you're in, we're going to focus on optimizing your detoxification functions. And that's not just your liver, but that it includes your skin, your lymphatics, your lungs, your liver, your kidneys, and your colon. So all those systems working together. So that's why, over the course of the month, your body is working on these things anyways, what we can do is then show up and say, I'm going to help my body with whatever it is doing, rather than giving your body two competing goals that, like, you know, it has its agenda and you have yours and you're trying to accomplish that and they're at odds with one another. This is the way to optimize what your body's already trying to do. And then we find that as women go through, when they're on the moon track, a lot of times doing this type of work will move them over into having their own cycle, in which case then you just scooch on over and start following your own cycle set by your body. So it's totally fine to move between the two, and especially during, you know, the postpartum time. A lot of times this helps move people in the right direction. The only difference that we have for either pregnant or breastfeeding mamas is that for the detox portion, so for phases 3 and 4, we don't have women implement new detox tools that they haven't already been implementing, because we don't want to, you know, mobilize all of those toxins and have them go in the bloodstream and ultimately end up in the breast milk. But everything else, you know, the food, the movement goals, the lifestyle things, the mindset, all still play a role. So there's lots of things that pregnant and breastfeeding moms can do, but we do have them modify just to make sure that everything's staying nice and safe.
Awesome. So can you dig in then a little bit to, like, let's start with the first half of the cycle, that inflammation, that optimizing inflammation phase. What are some of your best, like maybe the first steps to optimizing inflammation, reducing inflammation, and working with your body in that way?
Absolutely. And we talk about this a lot over on our Instagram, which is at zesty_ginger. So if you want the written versions of all this information, you can go over there. And then, of course, season 1 of our podcast is the entire 4 phases broken down very, very specifically.
It's
so
great.
There's lots of other places. Thank you. There's a lot of other places to find this. So, as we go through this, just know that this is available elsewhere. But, for phases 1 and 2 and optimizing inflammation, we love things like turmeric and ginger, for example, added to our smoothies or added to soups or, grated into food as just incorporated into a whole food. Or we like alcohol-free tinctures of both of those things because we love making elixirs. So these are whole food supplements in drink form. So a lot of times we'll take water and we'll add things like turmeric and ginger tinctures to the water to hydrate and also provide this inflammatory control. And then other things that we add to our elixir are things like tart cherry concentrate. So tart cherry juices and concentrate is great for helping to control inflammation from like a balanced approach. So it hits up various parts of the inflammatory cascade and helps calm things down in total. So we love combining those tinctures with the concentrate to make a really yummy drink. Probiotics and prebiotics is a great way to impact our inflammatory levels. Of course, histamine control, high estrogen and histamine is linked, and histamine is certainly related to inflammation in the body. So if that's happening, Dr. Jess's Allergy Master or Dr. Ben Lynch's Probiota Histamine X are great things to do for histamine. And then things like, the reason we talk about mindset so much is that stress and the stress response, so going into sympathetic mode in your body, is very inflammatory. That then we also have to detox those inflammatory compounds. So in addition to these physical factors, a lot of times there's mindset and lifestyle choices that we make that create our own reality. So whether that's asking poor questions like, why does this always happen to me? I must be like stupid. I must not be worth it. Like all of those thoughts that we have, our body hears and it interprets as the truth. And so we don't just take the right steps and then continue berating ourselves. It really comes down to then also marrying the two, where yes, we can impact our physiology, but we also have to address some of the root cause thoughts that then cause us to act in certain ways, which I know that you talk about a lot with intuitive eating, but all of this very much comes together. So does that give you some good ideas for phases?
Yeah. I loved all those tips, and I really love that everything that you provide is very simple, and obviously, and simple in a good way. It's doable, and obviously, if women want to dig in further, they can jump into your healthy hormones group if they're really having those real severe imbalances. But just starting out with those simple things, with simply learning how to reduce inflammation by implementing elixirs and probiotics, and I am all about the mindset. I actually have a funny story about the tinctures, elixirs. So I love the idea of elixirs, and I'm super big on supplements from whole food forms as much as possible, like getting as many nutrients as you can from real whole foods and only supplementing when necessary. And which is sometimes necessary in the case of things like, probiotics, and if you're not getting enough omegas and things like that. But I love the idea of the elixirs. And so I've been implementing them over the last, month or so. And my 5-year-old has fully gotten into it with me. So we went to Whole Foods and we got the tart cherry concentrate, and we got pomegranate juice. And so at nighttime we have our cocktail together. So not at night, when I'm cooking dinner. So we've been making those elixirs together. And I love that it's simple. And then she's learning too, where I'm teaching her a little bit about turmeric and inflammation in our body. And she's only 5, but she's like a future doctor. She's so fascinated by all this too. So
that's amazing.
It's just so fun.
Well, congrats on empowering your little woman. And that's that's always, we always just give the biggest kudos to our moms who are empowering their girls to already think about their body and their health and how we can actually, if step 1 is education, we put number 2 as empowerment, is because we never want to make people dependent on us for information too. We want to give information that then empowers women to take control of their own lives. And what you put in your water, what you're using to fuel yourself, how you're choosing to think about, are all ways that you empower yourself to take control of your health in a way that's so much more powerful than, we will never out supplement our own brain. Mm-hmm. We will lose that battle every time. And thank God that's the case, because really, our bodies have so much wisdom to them. But and that's a whole nother tangent that we could go on. But yeah, so all this stuff really gets married together beautifully when we start living this way. That's a little more constructive. Should I do the same sort of information for phases 3 and 4?
Yeah, I would love if you could kind of go a little bit more into the second half of the cycle, and if you can dig a little bit more into detox. I think a lot of my listeners, or women I talk to, get a little freaked out when they hear the word detox, and they think that, I've got to go on a 30-day juice cleanse or something to detox my body. But that's not the case, right? Detoxification is a systemic thing that our body is already doing, and you talk about really just supporting our body's natural detoxification. So I would love if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yes, we love the topic of detox because it's something that you can support really easily. It's something your body's doing every single day, all the time. If you're sweating, if you're peeing, if you're pooping, if you're breathing, right? So the term detox has gotten a little misconstrued into a program or something you need to force your body into. Really, our goal is just to help the body doing what it's already doing, optimizing it for the time of the month. So we're optimizing detoxification in the second half when a lot of your hormones levels are very high. So the majority of our women who are very uncomfortable with lots of PMS have excess estrogen at this time, and we need to help them get it out of their body. As soon as they can start pulling out of the body, they feel much, much better. A lot of the symptoms will go away, the PMS, the acne, the bloating, etc. So what the coolest thing is whole food source, just like you said. The coolest thing that we've seen, especially since we use the Dutch test, so that's the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones, we're actually looking at women's hormone levels. And the fun thing about that is we want women to be empowered to do what works for their body. So we can say, this is what we've seen work most often, but you get to go do it, and then you get to retest and see how it worked. We're not the expert telling you what your body's going to do. We're helping guide you to what works for most people, and then you can see if it works or not. So we've seen a lot of women who just don't want to take supplements or don't want to be on a bunch of different things. Cruciferous veggies alone have really, really shifted their estrogen metabolism, because on the Dutch test, you can not only see your estrogen levels, like your estradiol, but also where the estrogen is coming out. So how it's getting excreted out of the body, which pathway it's being sent down. And some of the pathways are very protective. Some of the pathways are much more dangerous and considered cancerous. So we can see this ratio, and it was so cool to see one of my clients after a few months of just really adding cruciferous veggies. So this is the things like broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, asparagus, greens, kale, collards, just adding a whole food source, broccoli sprouts actually being one of the highest. She really was able to shift all those numbers. And that was so cool to see, because this is something simple. You can start, in my family, my girls are, 3 and 8, and they know that there's going to be a cruciferous veggie at every dinner for sure, but at most meals even. They'll say, okay, instead of saying, where's your fruit and veggie, there's like, where's your fruit, where's your cruciferous veggie? So it's become a thing that we focus on, not always, and we don't stress about it when we don't, because we focus on doing it as much as we can, that when we decide to have a crazy meal of whatever that doesn't have vegetables at all, it's just not a concern, because we're focusing on that so often. So that's a really great whole food way to detox, which most people don't think I'm going to eat broccoli and detox, but that is a way to optimize that system. Other things in the same category, and my girls also love to make elixirs, so it's funny that yours is into that. But this is a good time to be using some of the elixirs. Again, as long as you're not pregnant, breastfeeding, like adding liquid chlorophyll is one of my absolute favorites. Cranberry concentrate, lemon, just half of a squeezed lemon. Those three together is my all-time favorite in a big glass of water. We do have inside of our program, the PMS project breaks down each of these phases one at a time, and there is an elixir for each phase. But what I've done is I've kind of just taken my favorite ingredients and mixed them together. So you don't always have to follow exactly, what's suggested. It's just that certain elixirs lean a little more heavily on detox, which is like the liquid chlorophyll. So the other thing that we really like beyond the elixirs is Detox Tools. So these are simple and often very cost efficient things like a tongue scraper. So this little metal tongue scraper or copper, and you're literally just you're just helping your body do what it's already doing. Every night your body's going around and it's grabbing the excess estrogen and metabolites and the toxins and the chemicals, and it's pulling it out of your body. And one of the places that it ends up is on the tongue. If you wake up and you see that thick film on your tongue, you'll know what we're talking about. When you're more hormonally imbalanced, or if you're dealing with a cold or something, you'll see that coating changes to be thicker, and it'll be more of a white or yellow, whereas the ideal is a thin, clear film. So you can just, physically remove it with the tongue scraper and give your body the relief from that. If you're going to swallow it again, and you're just going to have to do the same thing over the next night. So you're just helping it out. So it's super simple. Along the same lines is dry skin brushing. That's another one our ladies love. It's like a $10 brush, and it has a huge impact on your detox pathways, your lymphatic system. So you're helping physically move the lymphatic, since it doesn't have a heart to pump it around like the blood does. We rely on our lymphatic system, which is the drainage system. It's the sewage system of the body, to move by our movement. And most of us Americans, including us who are in the health world, we're sitting on our butt a lot of the day. I mean, we're sitting right here for 2 hours doing a podcast, right? So we have to make a little bit bigger effort to move if we can, but also move the lymphatic system. That's something like the dry brush or rebounding can do. So we love those simple tools that people can just add into their daily routine. Ideally, from ovulation to their next cycle. If they want to do it all month, that's fine too. But for some people, it's really nice to have a break and know that this is when I'm going to do it. So it's not a huge pressure.
I find some of those practices so satisfying too. Like I love to, like tongue scraping is one of like the grossest and coolest things I've ever done, because it is kind of gross the first couple times, but then you get used to it and it becomes one of those things where it's like very refreshing in the morning to just scrape my tongue and then I brush my teeth. And the same thing with dry brushing is something I've actually been doing for years. I worked for a holistic nutritionist before I even went to holistic nutrition school, like about a decade ago. And she taught us about dry skin brushing. And this is before I really learned a lot about detox. And I had a dry brush for years, and then I kind of lost it in a move, and I just started doing it again maybe a year ago. And I don't even like to shower without dry brushing because it's just so kind of like refreshing in the morning. It wakes you up, but you're also doing something really great for your body. So I think it's fun that you can add some of these practices in, and they might feel good, and you're also really supporting your body in that too.
Absolutely.
So another fun one for that is contrast showers, because they're absolutely free.
Yes.
And they wake you up like nobody's business in the morning. So that's another, that's the best part of some of this stuff is, you don't have to buy a dry skin brush. Sometimes your lymphatics are right underneath the surface of the skin. So even taking a wet washcloth and using it like that, you don't have to spend any money on this stuff, or very, very little. And that's why a lot of it is so cool, because it's something that we already have around. And, if you're taking a shower anyways, a contrast shower is an amazing thing to add at the end.
So a contrast shower, for my listeners who don't know, is alternating between hot and cold, right? So I'm really good at doing that in the summertime because I find it so refreshing, and it's really hard because I live in the Northeast in the wintertime to do it. But I try, and it is really fun and refreshing in the morning.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm coming from Chicago. It was not, although I have fairly advanced, I guess, or severe Raynaud's, which is where you don't get great blood flow to your hands and feet at times, and it's a blood vessel issue. And I found that contrast showers, especially in the winter, a lot of times that it's like a workout for your blood vessels, and that I actually have less symptoms of Raynaud's when I do the contrast showers in the winter. And it's funny how a lot of my grandma, so my family's Russian, and my grandma was very kind of like earthy type of vibe. And her fix for Raynaud's was to alternate buckets of hot water and cold water. So she would actually do this like 60 years ago. She was using this stuff, and I have found it to be as true today as when she was like doing this way back forever ago. So right now we're finding the scientific evidence behind a lot of the stuff that we've been doing for a long time as humans.
Isn't that so cool when tradition meets science, and we
cool.
can really start to see that evidence? I think that's so cool.
Yeah.
So one of the last things I want to ask you, ladies, is that I really appreciate, as we're chatting about the different phases of the cycle and talking about inflammation and detox and these simple things that the women listening can integrate, that it's a really balanced approach to cycle syncing. It's not an all or nothing approach. Like you said, you don't want the women to feel deprived. You don't want them in this, deprivation place, because, as I talk about a lot, deprivation oftentimes leads to overdoing it in whatever area because we feel so constrained. And really, I think a lot of what you share, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's really awareness-based. It's like learning more about your body and doing what you can and just adding things. So can you share a little bit about how you encourage women to approach cycle syncing overall without turning it into a set of rules, but really sort of adding to their life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is at the heart of our approach because, after education and empowerment, it was really enjoyment because we have to start with the goal in mind, the end goal in mind, which is for us to live a life where we feel happy and healthy in whatever way that looks for you. And that is why all of these kind of prescribed diets and fad ideas that put people in a box, a lot of times people find helpful at first and then restricting because it's something that they can either have success with or fail at. And what we have really done is say you cannot fail at living in sync with your cycle. You can either be in alignment to your authentic self or you're either a little bit to a lot out of alignment, right? So there's absolutely no way to fail at anything. And that's why it takes away a lot of the like, oh my gosh, I have to do this perfectly. I forgot one day. It's like none of that really exists in any of this, which is why for each phase, for our, let's say our PMS project, and also for healthy hormones is a little bit different because there's a personalized protocol that comes for each woman. But for the PMS project, for each phase, we break it down very simply in, how do we want to move during this phase? How do we want to fuel ourselves for this phase? Like Megan was saying, cruciferous veggies, adding those in, or nutrient density for inflammatory control, all of these. So we're giving in each category of life, we're addressing the most common things that happen and supporting the body. But from that standpoint, what we really want is people can pick how many portions of their life they want to focus on. For some people, it's really better to just pick one category for each phase and just do that one thing. Some other women are ready to really dig in and go all in and do a complete overhaul because they're just that sick and tired of feeling the way that they're feeling. And so this is all a really long way to say that, when we bring in that awareness, a lot of times we allow that alignment that we feel with ourselves, that internal guidance comes out and says, that's the calm whisper of your higher self telling you like, hey, maybe food is the place to focus, or, maybe doing another 5%, 10% improvement in your food won't really give you that much of a high return. So, maybe it's time to stop feeding the food drum and say my food is fine the way it is. What's another area of my life? And that way you're always leading from the inside for where you feel driven to focus your energies, where you want to make the improvements. And it is all driven by you and not an outside practitioner that's going to be driving your life. Does that make sense?
So much sense. Yeah,
okay, good.
I love your approach so much. And I mean, that's why I wanted to have you ladies on, is because I believe in the power of learning about our female cycles. And so many women are struggling with, PMS and hormone imbalances. And there really is, I think, a gentler way to go about it than going to extremes right away, right off the bat, because oftentimes what happens is, we go to extremes and maybe we feel good for a couple weeks and then we just can't handle it. So I really like that gentle approach to adding things and leading with your intuition.
Absolutely. Yeah. We just want, so much of our world is telling us how we should feel, what we should do, what we should feel like we're taken care of. And quite frankly, the only thing that you're going to stick with is the things that you really truly believe are most important, right? And so sometimes we don't even notice that what we want is not congruent with what we actually, sometimes the beliefs that we find underneath aren't congruent, and we just need the space and the quiet to get to the point where we realize that. right? Because it's not that hard of a thing to find, but if you're not looking for it, it's not going to be something that comes up for you.
Yeah, totally. So on that note, why do you believe that every mom needs to understand this, needs to understand about cycle syncing and about just becoming more educated about our female bodies?
Every mom needs to understand this because our children they're our hope. They're our hope for the next generation. They're our hope for really shifting the way the industry is around food, the way women are treated in the workplace, the kind of jobs and things that different people go after, and just shifting this, shifting from a completely 24-hour male physiology dominated workplace to a place where there's a little more leeway for females. So I think, one, it's important for every mom to know this, because if you are a balanced, happy, healthy, empowered, educated mom, then you are going to be operating from a place of love and support for your children. And I just think that's the best thing in the world for, the future of our planet and everything to come, to have children who are not being brought up in a strict fight or flight stress situation, because that, of course, we know is passed on to them and they take that on. So for moms, whether you have girls or not, I think that's very important. But even more importantly, if you have girls, I think learning this from an early age can really help women blossom into the person that they are meant to be, and really use this as a superpower, and instead of the way the commercials make it look as like, oh, this is the biggest annoying thing in the world. And actually, I remember having this 12-year-old girl say to me when I was pregnant with my first daughter, she said, she's like, I'm just so jealous. And I'm thinking, interesting comment. She's like, you're not going to have your period for 9 months. I'm like, oh man, I wish it were that simple, like creating a human inside my body. But I just thought, for someone who's already 12 and, maybe had like 5 periods, or, I don't know, maybe a couple years even, but to already be dreading this thing that she's looking forward to getting pregnant, just not to have her period. And that made me a little bit sad about how we're teaching our kids. So just overall having a more positive outlook on our cycles and using it to our advantage.
I love that so much. And I myself hope to empower my girls. I have 2 little girls. They're only 5 and 1 now, but I hope to empower them to be able to tune into their body and know more about their cycles than I did growing up, or until I was well into adulthood. So I love that. So do you have any last words of wisdom for the ladies who are listening?
Absolutely. We find that our biggest community interaction is on Instagram. So if you're struggling for community, because community is such a key to healing. So, everybody loves to hear the supplement piece. Everybody loves to hear the detox tools, but a lot of the time, the majority of a healing journey, is identifying the stressors in your life. And one of them is just not having people who understand you, or not having anybody you can talk to. Because I know for me, if you look around, you're like, my neighbors seem to be just chugging down the, sodas and eating McDonald's, and they seem fine. They're not complaining about any. And many of us are not in that category, where we tend to just be more in tune with our body. We feel more things, we have symptoms, and we have to kind of navigate that. So if you want to come find us on zesty_ginger on Instagram, then that's a great place for support. Like Alex said, we have many, many podcasts on the 4-Phase Cycle podcast to kind of walk you through this. And then if you're ready to actually dig in with us, we have kind of an intro program, which is the PMS project. That's where we go through phase by phase by phase. And then we have a little bit more advanced 3-month program, Healthy Hormones Group, where you can actually dig in with some lab work. So we test the hormones and neurotransmitters. But the key is to pick one thing you're going to do, 1 to 3 things, one small change you're going to make. If you're listening, you're like, oh no, I'm not doing any of these things. Pick one thing. I'm going to buy a dry steam brush. I'm going to follow you on Instagram. Just pick one thing. I'm going to do one elixir. And then every week you're just following that upward spiral. You're just adding the next thing. And I think that's the best way to make the long lasting change.
Totally. I talk about that a lot, that just one thing approach, just adding one thing at a time, and all of a sudden they'll add up to this change in your life. And it's really funny. I went and I saw my midwife about 2 months ago, who also works as my kind of like my OB. And so I just went to see her for my yearly appointment, and the nurse is kind of doing my intake, and she was like, "So how are your cycles?" And I was like, "They're good." And she's like, "Are they still irregular?" And I'm like, no, they're actually totally regular. Like every single month. And she's like looking at my chart going, "Wow, what did you do differently?" And I'm like, well, nothing really different than the last time we talked. And really all it's been for me, and I know for a lot of the friends I've had that have done a lot of healing with their hormones and their health, it's really just been one little step at a time. And I think that you ladies do approach that approach so beautifully and promote that approach so beautifully. So because I am a foodie at heart and I want to share food in a way that is joyful, I have 3 fun final questions. So you can answer it however you want to. The first one is, what is your favorite thing to cook for yourself or for your family?
I make some darn good chicken wings and potato wedges, and actually I learned from Megan artichokes in the oven, like just wrapped in foil and then baked for an hour in there, and then you dip them in the Primal Kitchen chipotle mayo, and it's amazing. So yeah, that's mine.
And I'd say mine is, we really love fish tacos in our house. We used to live in San Diego, and you could get such amazing fish tacos. So we've made up our own, and they're in a collard green wrap. And it's also pretty simple because other than cooking the fish, the rest is just chopping. So salsa, cabbage, avocado, and in a wrap, and it's pretty awesome.
That sounds so good. I love fish tacos. So number 2 is, what is your favorite thing to order or have someone cook for you?
Ooh, I love when someone makes me a good steak, I'll be honest.
That was mine.
Yeah.
There is something about a really well-cooked steak. It is not easy to do. Not well done, well-cooked steak. It's really not easy to do. So when somebody cooks that for you and it's really good, I love that.
Mm-hmm. So true.
So the last one is that we talk a lot about finding your beautiful balance, going beyond obsessing over food and these lifestyle things, but really just finding nourishment and pleasure in food and our life and nourishing ourselves in every area. So what does your beautiful balance mean to you?
Oh man, this is a really good question, and I think it's a really important thing for all of us to answer. But for me, a beautiful balance means that I feel good. So what I mean by that is that I used to strong arm myself into doing things, and I was really, really good at it. Like, I'm really good at making myself, up to having an eating disorder. Like, if I say I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to eat, and all this stuff. And I realized that was something that I picked up that worked for school and training and becoming a doctor. That does not work for health, because the whole forcing of anything is not, I don't have the insight as a tiny human being to know the future enough to control everything about it. And for me to then feel like, okay, I'm going to sit back and relinquish this control and listen to that internal guidance and just say, my perfect balance is listening to myself consistently. And my own inner parent gets to show up for myself like that, where I say, I will show up for myself and listen to what I need every time. And doing that is really difficult because we're taught to listen to everyone else. But once I started listening and just saying, I don't need to know where I'm going all the way, but I need to know, the next step. And as long as I know the next step, I'm going to honor that. Then that has really changed my life because I no longer force myself to do things. I'm actually driven by what feels consistently good, what feels joyful, what feels content, gives me contentment and all of that, as opposed to a place of hate for myself, which is where I was coming from previously. So that's mine.
Mine, I'd say, especially when it relates to bringing my children into it, is focusing on the experience over kind of the specific guidelines of what we do or do not do, or we do eat or we don't eat. An example was I just came back on a road trip with my daughters yesterday, and we spent the night in a fun hotel. And we got in at 10, almost 11 p.m. And my older daughter and I decided we were going to order room service and we were going to get whatever we wanted. So we had a big thing of chicken wings and French fries. And it was really, really exciting to her. It was, she had never been in a hotel and ordered room service. I had her actually call herself. And I know that just a few years ago, I would have had a really hard time doing that without thinking about the nutritional value or of what we were eating. And I just realized that without making a huge deal about eating something that we don't normally eat, it was just all about the experience, and we both enjoyed it, and we moved on, and there was no shame or guilt. We just kind of woke up and had a regular breakfast, but we got to have that time together.
Oh, what a beautiful approach to share with your kids too. Oh, that's awesome. So you already shared your Instagram, and did you share your website? If you haven't shared your website, can you just share just one more time, all of the places where our listeners can find you, can connect with you?
Sure. So Instagram is zesty_ginger, and then our website is zestyginger.com, and you can find on Instagram, you can find all these links as well. We're kind of linked up to the podcast and the website and everything else. But those are the two places that we're most active. And we do also have a Facebook group, so Zesty Ginger on Facebook, and we have our podcast, which is the 4-Phase Cycle podcast, which you will be on soon. So
it's an excellent podcast too. I think I told you ladies that I completely binged on season 1 once I listened to the Modern Mamas podcast with you ladies on it, and I was like, I love learning about hormones and cycle syncing. So I listened to a lot of episodes that weekend, and my husband was really sick of me talking about hormones. And I think we're going to have a code for my listeners on your new PMS project, right? So we'll put that link and the code in the description box. And that just looks like an incredible program. I know I have a lot of personal friends who could really, really benefit from that. So we'll link to that as well. So thank you both, Alex and Megan, for being on the Healthy Balance Mama podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your wisdom with my listeners.
Thanks for having us, Kristin.
Thank you.
Wow, you guys, I hope you found that as informative as I did, even though I have already, learned about cycle syncing, and I've been practicing some form of cycle syncing for the past few years. And even though I have already learned a little bit more about what Megan and Alex do and what they recommend, I was still blown away by how much I learned during this episode. And I really hope that it empowers you to really tune in to your female hormones a little bit more and your cycle, and that you learned a little bit more about yourself, and that maybe you can take some of the simple tools that Megan and Alex gave you and honor your body a little bit more in that way as a woman. I think our bodies are so incredibly fascinating, how much they change throughout the month, and I think there is so much that we can learn about ourselves and through cycle syncing. And I love that their approach is so balanced, and the things they recommend are simple and easy to implement, and that they have some awesome programs to move you forward if you are feeling stuck in the areas of PMS or hormone balance. So I hope you found this beneficial. I hope you'll go ahead and follow them on social media and check in with any of the stuff that they have if you find that helpful for you. All right, friends, thank you so much once again for tuning in to the Healthy Balance Mama podcast. I will talk to you in the next episode. Thank you, friends, so much for listening to this episode of the Healthy Balance Mama podcast. I truly hope it encouraged and inspired you today to live a healthier life without restriction. If you enjoyed this podcast, would you do me a huge favor and give it a star rating and review in iTunes? Every rating, review, and subscribe helps this podcast be seen and heard by more women who need to hear it. You can find me, Kristin, on Instagram and Facebook at Healthy Mama Kris or on my website, healthymamakris.com. And don't forget to join us in the newly launched Supermama Society, a monthly membership to help you tune in to your intuition and nourish yourself without restriction, to live like the supermama I know you are. As a reminder, the information and opinions on this podcast are intended for information and inspiration only and are not a substitute for professional medical advice or treatment. Please consult with your healthcare practitioner before making any changes. Have a beautiful day, friends.